For the first time in a decade, we in Britain have come face to face with shortage. Shortage of commodities, shortage of fuel, shortage of work even, as short-time working became the rule in 1974. With all this, escalating prices and an inflation in violence which matches the inflation of monetary values.
What happened this morning then?
The train was late.
Haven't you ever considered a bicycle?
No.
We'd better get on then. Would you fetch from the press file, please?
Certainly.
Let's think back 30 years, to the years after World War II. Scenes from our childhood. Scenes of the years before many of us were born. Scenes from a period when people began to expect, as a right, an ever-increasing standard of living, based on material terms, and most of those of limited value and of short-term duration. In the 1950s, coal was still our dominant energy source. We worked 1,000 mines. We employed 750,000 miners. Wages weren't high, but our money bought us something. We hoped, then, to be able to produce more and more each year, to stroll into an expanding future, to enjoy ever-increasing holidays and a greater opportunity for leisure. Next year, everything would be better still. We looked forward, then, to finding more and more ways of spending our money. Goods, after all, were plentiful, and we had the money to spend. We came to expect ever-rising wages. The profits of industry were growing. But to what extent were we contributing during the 50s? Better welfare, better schools, better roads, better hospitals. These were going to be ours by right, weren't they? Never mind who was going to pay for them. So we ended up with some of our aims achieved, if even we'd been conscious of what we were aiming for. We did, to our credit, begin to become conscious of our environment and start to take steps to protect it. We began to realize that we have one world, and that's the only one we've got. What we forgot, though, was the price we were paying back there in the golden years. We ignored the fact that no one can live on capital alone, that we were robbing what had been stored and saved by nature. We ignored that energy is finite. We ignored the rule that you can only take out what you put in, because our glorious expansion was in fact made possible only by energy, cheap energy, and mainly because of cheap oil. Between 1950 and 1972, our imports of oil leaped forward sixfold. Oil was plentiful. Oil was cheap. We ignored the fact that to a large extent we were living off the backs of less privileged people. And because of cheap imported fuel, we acquiesced in the decision to run down our own indigenous energy source, our own coal. We closed mines. We shut the door on the memories and the livelihoods of many of the people who had worked them. We started to close the floodgates on one of our most abundant national riches. There were, of course, those who foresaw years ago the dangers which we would have to face, speaking with foresight in the early 70s.
You see, about 10 years ago, when those who are responsible for looking at the requirements 5 and 10 years ahead began to look at their general assessments, they made, in my opinion, the fatal error of underestimating the growth of affluence in society.
In 1970, the fears of the few over the affluent society became the nightmare of the many. We began to realize that oil reserves were limited. Europe and Japan were almost totally dependent on imported oil to keep straight their energy books. But what about their account books? With a Middle East stranglehold on supplies, the price of oil shot up. This is how Britain paid from the end of the war until 1974. So the motorways emptied. The shortages became more acute. Inflation took a greater hold. The energy crisis became a monetary crisis, a world balance of payments crisis. And in the future, we know that world population will increase. We know that the third world, as we call it, the developing countries, will be industrializing. They too will be looking for an enhanced standard of living. Today, they use 3 units of energy a person a year. Soon they will be aiming towards the 70 a year consumed in the rich nations. So it follows that by 1985, the energy consumption of the whole world will have to increase, involving every form of energy we know. In Britain, how can we come to terms with the problem without even further bankrupting the economy? Conservation of energy in the home is a start.
When we bought this house, we took steps to ensure that our heating bills were kept to a minimum, and for this purpose, we filled, first of all, the outer walls with urea formaldehyde foam, which is a type of plastic foam. We then followed on with insulating in the roof space with fiberglass wool. The job's done now, and we think we're reaping the rewards in a warmer home and a saving on fuel costs.
Although the house is empty during the day, the children at school and my husband and I at work, the very efficient heating system that we have, in conjunction with the thermostatic control, and the insulation work that we've already done, I think you can say that we've started to do something about this very important heat-saving problem.
But most important is to reduce our dependence on imported energy by exploiting to the full the resources we control, and by conserving them for as long as we can. North Sea oil and gas will help, but they too are finite. They won't last forever, and they will be expensive. Nuclear energy has yet to come within spitting distance of either oil or coal. And how nuclear power will affect the environment is still unsure. For Britain, the answer to energy must still be coal. The reserves are there, they're still being proven. Vast new coalfields like the Selby complex in Yorkshire are waiting to be exploited without wrecking the landscape. One mine alone will produce as much energy as the whole of our share in North Sea oil. In South Wales, as in the Midlands, a new expansion of mining is underway. By 1985, more than half our energy needs will have to depend upon coal, and on the men who mine it, the men who make possible its mining. But how we dispose of our energy depends upon all of us. Whatever our jobs, whatever our circumstances, there must be a new determination by all of us never again to allow our natural riches to be squandered. All our energy resources are limited. It is up to us all to make sure that they are spent with care, disbursed only after thought. Otherwise, the way ahead will be bleak indeed.